When I moved into my daughter's house, I thought I'd found peace after a lifetime of sacrifices. But one evening, while I was cooking, my son-in-law walked in, looked me straight in the eyes and said, "This isn't your kitchen." I swallowed my pride, quietly retreating, until a call from the Realtor changed everything. My name, my signature, my ownership? Suddenly, the balance shifted. I smiled for the first time in weeks. They had no idea what was coming at the next family dinner. My name is Margaret Whitman, and I'm 58 years old. I've lived enough life to see both the warm embrace of family and the sharp sting of loss. I lost my husband, Richard, 5 years ago, after a long battle with heart disease. We had built a modest life together. Small house on the edge of town, weekend barbecues, and a front porch where we'd drink coffee every Sunday morning. When he passed, it felt like half of my foundation crumbled. I told myself I'd stay strong because that's what he would have wanted. The years that followed weren't easy. My own health began to falter and medical bills stacked higher than I could manage. My daughter, Anna, came to visit one rainy afternoon, a worried look in her eyes. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she had once done her homework, and told me softly that maybe it was time to sell the house. "It'll take the pressure off, Mom. You won't have to worry anymore. You can come stay with us," she said. I hesitated. That little house wasn't just bricks and wood. It was my history. But the bills were relentless, and my savings were thin. Anna's suggestion seemed logical, wrapped in the comfort of her warm smile. She spoke about how much her husband David adored me, how the kids would love having Grandma around more often, and how the quiet suburban neighborhood would be just what I needed to rest and recover. So I agreed. I sold the house, paid off the medical debt, and packed my life into a few boxes. On moving day, Anna came with David to help me. David was his usual charming self, polished, confident, and polite, in that way that makes you feel slightly formal around him. "It'll be nice having you with us, Margaret," he said, shaking my hand in a way that felt more like a business agreement than a family embrace. I brushed the thought aside. Their home was beautiful, a sharp contrast to my modest little place. A 2-story house with clean white siding, black shutters, and a manicured lawn that seemed like it belonged in a magazine. The street was quiet, lined with maple trees that would turn golden in the fall. It smelled of fresh paint and lemon-scented cleaner when I stepped inside. Anna showed me to my room. It was small but cozy, tucked near the back of the house, with a window overlooking the garden. She'd added personal touches, a quilt I loved, framed photos of my late husband and me, even a vase of fresh daisies. My heart softened. It felt like a welcome. The first few days were warm. I woke up to the sound of Anna making coffee, and sometimes the smell of pancakes for the kids. David left early for work but was always courteous, greeting me with, "Good morning, Margaret," before heading out the door. I spent my afternoons helping Anna with the children, reading them stories, and walking to the park down the street. In the evenings, we'd have dinner together. I'd offer to cook, but Anna would smile and tell me to relax. "You've done enough cooking for a lifetime, Mom. Let us take care of you." I wanted to believe her. After all, wasn't this what family was for? To be together, to take care of one another? I started to feel a fragile kind of peace. I thought about the years I had spent worrying, budgeting, and caring for everyone else. Now, perhaps it was my turn to rest. I'd sit in the garden sometimes, watching the kids chase fireflies and think maybe, just maybe, I had finally found a safe harbor. David remained polite, if somewhat distant. He wasn't unkind, he simply carried himself like a man who valued order and control. The house ran on a certain rhythm, and he seemed to prefer it that way. At first, I didn't mind. I told myself it was his home after all, and I was just a guest. But the word guest settled strangely in my mind. One Saturday morning, Anna suggested we all have breakfast together on the patio. David had made fresh coffee, and the children were buzzing with energy. I watched him carefully arrange everything, the plates, the silverware, the napkins folded just so. He moved around the kitchen with precision, and I realized that this space was more his domain than Anna's. I filed that observation away, not thinking much of it at the time. I found myself slowly adapting to the household. I took walks around the neighborhood, familiarized myself with the market nearby, and even joined a small book club at the local library. People were friendly here. It was quieter than the bustling street I had lived on for years. I began to think Anna had been right. This was better for me. At night, in my room, I'd sometimes look at the boxes I hadn't unpacked yet. They held pieces of my old life, worn cookbooks, my wedding china, a set of mixing bowls Richard had bought me one Christmas. I wondered if I'd use them again, or if they'd just sit in storage. I told myself there was no rush. Life for the moment seemed steady. I didn't notice the tiny cracks forming. I didn't pay attention to the subtle glances between David and Anna when certain topics came up. I missed the slight tension in David's voice when schedules shifted or plans changed. I thought we were settling into a comfortable routine. Looking back, those were the quiet before the storm. But in those first weeks, all I felt was relief. After years of carrying burdens alone, I thought I had finally stepped into a chapter of rest and security. I had no idea how quickly that illusion would be tested. The first few weeks in Anna and David's home passed in a careful, almost choreographed rhythm. I began to notice the patterns. David left for work promptly at 7:30 a.m. Anna walked the kids to school, and by 8:15 the kitchen counters were spotless. I'd always appreciated a tidy home, but David's precision seemed different. The silverware was arranged in a specific order, the pantry labeled like a small grocery store, and the refrigerator shelves lined with perfect symmetry. David remained polite with me, always greeting me with a measured, "Good morning, Margaret." Never "Mom" or anything warmer. At first, I thought it was simply his way of maintaining respect, but something in his tone suggested a thin layer of distance. He was careful, deliberate, as though every word he spoke had been weighed before leaving his lips. Anna, on the other hand, was sunshine. She tried to keep everyone comfortable, especially me. But I could see the subtle tension in her shoulders whenever David and I were in the same room. She laughed more loudly when he was home, almost as if filling any silence with cheer. One Thursday afternoon, I decided to surprise them with dinner. Anna had mentioned how busy her week had been, and I wanted to give her a break. I pulled out some ingredients from the fridge and began working on a roast chicken recipe Richard used to love. The smell of garlic and rosemary began to fill the air, wrapping the kitchen in a familiar warmth. I was chopping vegetables when I heard the door open. David's voice echoed from the hallway as he spoke into his phone, then stopped mid-sentence when he walked into the kitchen. His eyes flickered over the counter, the cutting board, the seasoning jars, the mixing bowls. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that felt careful. "Oh, Margaret," he said, setting his briefcase down. "Cooking tonight?" "Yes," I replied cheerfully. "I thought I'd make a nice dinner for everyone. It's been a while since I cooked a proper meal." David stepped closer, his eyes scanning the space as though taking inventory. "That's very kind of you," he said, then paused. "You know, the kitchen has a certain system. I've arranged everything a specific way. It just helps keep things organized." I froze for a second, the knife still in my hand. His tone was light, even friendly, but the words landed like a subtle warning. "Oh, of course," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll be sure to put everything back where I found it." He chuckled softly, almost as if to soften the edge. "I'm sure it'll be delicious," he added, then left the room. I stood there for a moment, my chest feeling unexpectedly tight. It was such a small thing, barely a comment, but it left me unsettled. It was his home, yes, but something about the way he said "system" made me feel like an outsider navigating someone else's rules. That evening, Anna came home and the three of us sat down to dinner. She was thrilled at the meal, complimenting every bite. David was polite, even generous with his praise. "You really are a great cook, Margaret," he said, raising his glass slightly. "But I do like to keep the kitchen in order. You know how it is." Anna glanced at me. her smile faltering for just a second before she quickly looked down at her plate. She didn't defend me, didn't challenge him. She simply kept the conversation moving. I told myself not to read too much into it. David valued order, that was all. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the kitchen, the heart of the home, wasn't a place where I truly belonged. Over the next few days, I noticed more small things. David preferred the TV remote arranged a certain way on the coffee table. He straightened the throw pillows after anyone sat on the couch. He didn't scold or complain. He simply fixed things quietly, with a tight smile. Anna tiptoed around these habits, making small adjustments before he even had to. I began to see how she managed the household like a delicate balancing act. I didn't want to add to the tension, so I kept my observations to myself. One Sunday morning, we were all having breakfast when a neighbor stopped by. David walked them through the house, proudly pointing out the renovations he'd made, the remodeled kitchen, the polished floors, the perfectly trimmed garden. He spoke with a sense of ownership that was both natural and absolute. At one point, the neighbor joked, "Beautiful home. Must have cost a fortune." David smiled, glancing at Anna but not at me. "Worth every penny," he said. It was a small moment, but it hit me harder than I expected. I'd sold my own home, contributed financially in ways David probably never considered worth mentioning. Yet here I was, watching him present the house as entirely his domain. That night, I sat in my room replaying the day's events. It wasn't that I wanted credit. I just wanted to feel like I belonged. But David's words, his careful control of the space, his subtle claims of ownership, they whispered something I couldn't quite ignore. I brushed it off, telling myself not to be oversensitive. After all, Anna had invited me here. David had never been openly rude. Still, somewhere deep inside, a quiet thought began to take root. This house might not be as welcoming as I thought. It had been a long day, and the house was unusually quiet that evening. Anna had taken the kids to their soccer practice, and David was running late from work. I decided it would be nice to surprise them with dinner, something comforting, something that would make the house smell warm and welcoming when they walked in. I pulled out chicken breasts from the fridge, seasoning them with garlic, thyme, and a dash of paprika. The sound of the oven preheating filled the kitchen with a soft hum. I set out vegetables to roast, arranging them on a baking sheet with the care of someone who had done this for decades. Cooking had always been my language of love, the way I made people feel cared for without having to say the words. As I moved around the kitchen, I noticed again how meticulously everything was placed. The spice jars were lined up alphabetically, the utensils arranged by size. I was careful to keep things in order, telling myself that being respectful of David's system would avoid any discomfort. I had just slid the tray of vegetables into the oven when the front door opened. Footsteps echoed down the hall, steady and measured. David's voice followed, low and clipped, as he finished a phone call. I smiled to myself, glad he'd be home in time for a proper meal. The moment he stepped into the kitchen, the air shifted. He looked at the counter, at the open spice jars, at the cutting board with its scattered bits of herbs. His eyes lingered on the oven. Then he looked at me. "This isn't your kitchen." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't even sharp, but the words dropped into the room like a weight, silencing the warm hum in my chest. I stood frozen for a moment, the wooden spoon still in my hand. I started, then stopped. My mind scrambled for the right response, but the sudden tightness in my throat made it hard to speak. David's expression didn't change. It was calm, almost casual, as though he'd just pointed out a fact. "I just mean," he added, "things here are organized in a certain way. I don't want anything to get misplaced." I nodded slowly, forcing my lips into something that resembled a polite smile. "Of course, I understand." My voice sounded small, even to me. Just then, Anna walked in with the kids, her cheeks flushed from the cool evening air. She looked from David to me, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "Dinner smells amazing, Mom," she said brightly, setting her purse down. David didn't acknowledge her comment. He opened the fridge, rearranging a few items before shutting it again. Anna glanced at him, then at me, and for a brief moment, her smile faltered. We sat down to dinner, the table quiet except for the sound of silverware against plates. I tried to make small talk, asking the kids about their practice, but the warmth I had imagined for this meal had evaporated. The food tasted different, bland, heavy. Anna made a few attempts to steer the conversation to neutral topics, but David remained quiet, his gaze occasionally flicking toward the kitchen as though checking that everything was back in its place. I felt myself shrinking in my chair, suddenly aware of every small movement, every sound I made. The walls of the dining room seemed closer, the air thicker. I wanted to disappear. After dinner, I cleared the table, stacking plates carefully, making sure to leave no trace of my presence in the kitchen. David moved to the living room with the kids, and Anna stayed behind, drying the dishes as I washed. She didn't mention David's comment, didn't ask if I was okay. Instead, she told me about a PTA meeting next week and how busy her schedule was. I nodded, my mind somewhere else entirely. When the dishes were done, I retreated to my room earlier than usual. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I stared at the quilt Anna had put there when I first moved in. It had felt like a welcome once. Now it felt like a reminder that this space, this small room, was the only part of the house that was truly mine. I thought about what David had said. "This isn't your kitchen." The words looped in my mind, heavier each time. I told myself it was just about organization, about his preference for order. But another part of me knew it was more than that. It was a reminder of my place here. A guest, someone temporary, someone who didn't fully belong. I began to pull back in the days that followed. I stopped offering to cook dinner. I spent more time in my room, reading or knitting, and less time in the shared spaces of the house. I told Anna I was just tired, that I wanted to rest more, but the truth was I felt like a shadow in a place that was supposed to be my home. The house felt different now, colder somehow. Every interaction was careful, measured, like walking across thin ice. And beneath it all, a quiet ache settled in my chest. I had come here believing I'd found a safe harbor, but that night at the dinner table marked the first crack in that illusion, the first shift in the ground beneath my feet. In the days after David's comment, I moved through the house like a ghost. I no longer offered to cook. When Anna made dinner, I sat at the table smiling politely and thanking her, but I didn't step foot in the kitchen unless I absolutely had to. I avoided lingering in the living room when David was home, retreating to my room with a book or knitting project in hand. I told myself it was to keep the peace, that it wasn't worth the tension. But deep down, I felt something shift. The house didn't feel warm anymore. It felt curated, controlled, a place where I was welcome as long as I stayed within invisible boundaries. Anna noticed my quietness. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked one evening while folding laundry. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, forcing a small smile. "Just tired lately. I think I need more rest." She nodded, accepting my answer too quickly, as though she didn't want to dig deeper. I wondered if she sensed the undercurrent in her own home, the way her husband's words had planted a subtle divide. One Thursday morning, when Anna took the kids to school and David had already left for work, I decided to tidy up my small room. It was the one place I could rearrange things without anyone noticing or correcting me. As I organized my closet, I found a stack of old paperwork in a box I hadn't looked through since moving in. Among the papers, medical bills, Richard's insurance documents, there was a white envelope from a bank I didn't recognize. Curious, I opened it. My breath caught when I saw my name, written clearly in bold letters, followed by the address of Anna and David's house. For a moment, I thought it must be a mistake. I read the letter again. It wasn't a bill. It looked like some kind of notice related to property documentation. I sat down on the edge of my bed, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. Why would my name be connected to this house? I had sold my home, yes, but I never expected to be tied to Anna's property in any formal way. I thought I had simply given her the money to help with her family's future. A part of me wanted to march straight to Anna and ask her about it. But another part, the part that had learned the value of quiet observation, told me to hold back. This didn't feel like something to confront in the middle of the day over coffee. I slipped the letter back into its envelope and placed it in my nightstand drawer. My heart was beating faster now, a strange mixture of confusion and something else I couldn't quite name. Was it relief? Hope? If my name was tied to this house in some official way, what did that mean? That evening at dinner, I watched David more closely. He spoke about work, about a new project he was managing, but his eyes never lingered on me. Anna chatted happily, filling the conversation with stories about the kids. I smiled and nodded, but my mind was elsewhere, circling around that letter. Over the next few days, I became more observant. I paid attention to mail that arrived, to the way David handled documents. He was meticulous, always filing things away immediately. Once, when he was distracted by a phone call, I saw him slide a thick envelope into a drawer in the office. I didn't know what it contained, but the sight stirred something in me, a sense that there was more to this house than I had been told. At night, I lay awake, thinking about all the choices that had led me here, selling my home, moving into theirs, trusting that this would be a place of rest. I thought about the years I had spent working double shifts, paying off debts, making sure Anna had everything she needed. And now, here I was, tiptoeing around my own daughter's home, afraid to take up space in the kitchen. But that letter whispered something different. It was a small thing, just a piece of paper, but it held a question I couldn't ignore. Why is my name here? The thought stayed with me, not as a source of immediate comfort, but as a quiet ember. For the first time since David's words had stung me, I felt a spark of something other than defeat. I didn't know where this would lead. I didn't even know if it meant anything significant. But I tucked the envelope away carefully, like a card in a hand I wasn't ready to play yet. As the days passed, my behavior changed in subtle ways. I still avoided the kitchen when David was home, but I no longer felt like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. I started watching, listening, paying closer attention. The weight of David's words hadn't disappeared, but now there was something else beneath them, an unspoken possibility that things weren't exactly as they seemed. For the first time in weeks, I found myself waiting for the right moment, waiting for the next clue. It was a Wednesday morning when the phone rang. Anna had taken the kids to school and David was in his home office, the door slightly ajar. I was in the living room folding laundry when the house phone's ring broke the silence. David's office phone was closer, so I assumed he would answer. But after a second ring, a third, and then a fourth, curiosity tugged at me. I stepped toward the receiver in the hallway and picked it up. "Hello?" I said. There was a pause, then a bright, professional voice answered. "Good morning. This is Carol from Westwood Realty. May I speak with Mrs. Margaret Whitman? We need your signature on some documents related to the property at 418 Meadowbrook Lane." My heart skipped a beat. Mrs. Margaret Whitman, property at 418 Meadowbrook Lane. That was Anna and David's address. I began, but before I could respond further, David's footsteps approached quickly. He appeared in the hallway, his expression sharp, the phone from my hand already halfway to his. "I've got it, thanks," he said smoothly, his voice steady but his jaw tight. I stepped back, startled. "Yes, Carol, hi. Yes, I'm aware. That was a clerical error. Margaret's not involved in this transaction. We'll get it sorted." His tone was calm, but I noticed the faint edge beneath it, the way he paced slightly as he spoke. "No, you don't need to bother her with this. I'll call you back later." He hung up the phone and turned to me with a practiced smile. "That was just a mix-up. Something about old paperwork that still has your name on it. I'll take care of it." I frowned. Why would my name be on it at all? "It's just the way the bank handled things back when we bought the place," he said casually, almost too casually. "Some outdated records are still floating around. Nothing for you to worry about." His tone was final, the kind that leaves no room for further questions. I nodded slowly, but inside my mind was spinning. The envelope from the bank in my drawer, the letter with my name and this address, and now a realtor asking for my signature. This wasn't just old paperwork. David returned to his office, shutting the door firmly this time. I stood in the hallway for a moment, staring at the closed door, my hand still faintly trembling. Something was off. I went back to folding laundry, but my focus was gone. Every neatly folded shirt felt mechanical, my thoughts looping around the same question. Why is David so determined to keep me out of this? That afternoon, I sat in my room, the envelope from my drawer spread out on the bed. I read it again and again, trying to piece together the connection. I didn't understand all the legal terms, but it was clear my name wasn't there by accident. David's explanation might have satisfied someone else, but not me. His urgency to dismiss the call, the way he insisted on handling it himself, it all felt like a carefully managed performance. I decided to keep quiet, at least for now, but I would pay closer attention. Over the next few days, I noticed small details I hadn't before. David took more calls in his office with the door closed. Sometimes, after one of those calls, he would come out looking tense, rifling through drawers or pulling out files. Once, when he was at work, I passed by the office and saw a stack of folders on his desk. The top one was labeled Property Documents. My fingers itched to open it, but I didn't. Not yet. At dinner, David was polite as always, but there was something different now. His smile seemed tighter, his questions to me shorter. I had the sense he was watching me, waiting to see if I would bring up the phone call. I didn't. Anna, as usual, seemed oblivious to the tension. She chatted about the kids, about errands, about her book club. I smiled and nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. At night, lying in bed, I replayed the moment in the hallway over and over. Carol's voice on the phone, asking for my signature. David's swift interception, his insistence that it was just a mix-up. I thought about Richard, about how he always told me to trust my instincts. "If something doesn't feel right, Margaret," he used to say, "don't ignore it." Something didn't feel right. I didn't know yet what David was trying to hide, but I knew one thing. He didn't want me involved, and that alone was enough to make me want to dig deeper. The ember that had sparked when I found that letter now burned a little brighter. I wasn't sure what I would find or what it would mean, but I was no longer just a passive guest in this house. I would watch, I would listen, and I would wait for the next opportunity. The morning after the realtor's call, I waited until David left for work before moving quietly into action. My heart beat a little faster as I approached the boxes I'd stored in the corner of my room, the ones I hadn't fully unpacked since moving in. Somewhere in there, I knew, were the old mortgage documents and financial papers from the time Anna and David bought the house. I sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully pulling out envelopes, folders, and neatly rubber-banded stacks of paperwork. Receipts, bank statements, insurance forms, they all spilled out, a paper trail of my life. Then buried under an old tax folder, I found it. The thick manila envelope labeled Loan Documents, Meadowbrook. I opened it slowly, my fingers brushing over the familiar letterhead of the bank. As I flipped through the pages, my eyes caught the line that made my chest tighten. Owners of record: David Whitman, Anna Whitman, Margaret Whitman. My name, clear as day, not as a guarantor, not as a temporary co-signer, as an owner. I sank back against the bed frame, the words blurring slightly as my mind reeled. All this time, David had treated me like a guest, like someone who had no claim to the space, no voice in how things were run. And yet, here it was, in black and white. My legal standing in the very house I'd been told to treat carefully. I thought back to the day Anna had asked me for help. They'd struggled to get financing, she'd said. Adding my name would make the loan easier to approve. It's just a formality, she'd assured me. I had signed without hesitation, never imagining it would matter later. But clearly, it mattered now. I kept turning the pages, scanning for anything else of interest. That's when I saw it. An amendment request, tucked neatly between two original documents. It was a request to remove my name from the title, transferring full ownership to David and Anna. The date caught my attention. It was from almost 2 years ago, and next to request status, in neat, stamped letters, denied, signature not obtained. I stared at it for a long time, the pieces slowly clicking into place. David had tried to remove me quietly, probably hoping I wouldn't notice. But without my signature, the process couldn't be completed. My name had stayed. A strange sense of power flickered in my chest, small but undeniable. For weeks, I had been shrinking in this house, avoiding conflict, telling myself to stay quiet. But here, in my hands, was proof that I wasn't as powerless as I felt. Still, I knew better than to confront David outright. Not yet. Information was leverage, but timing was everything. Richard had taught me that. Don't play your hand until you know what game they're playing, he used to say. I slid the documents back into the envelope, tucking it into a drawer in my nightstand beneath a stack of scarves. I made a mental note to make copies when I had the chance. That evening, David came home later than usual. I was in the living room knitting when I heard the low murmur of his voice in the office. His tone was tight, the way it had been during the call with the Realtor. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard the click of the drawer, the same drawer where I'd seen the property documents folder before. Anna passed through the hall, humming softly, carrying a basket of laundry. She didn't seem to notice the tension, or maybe she was choosing not to. At dinner, the conversation was light. David asked about the kids' upcoming school play. Anna filled him in on errands, and I sat quietly, smiling when appropriate, but keeping my thoughts to myself. Beneath the surface, I was holding something far more substantial than small talk. After dinner, I excused myself early, retreating to my room. I sat on the bed, the quiet of the house settling around me. In the drawer beside me was my proof, my leverage, my card to play when the moment came. For now, I would wait. I would watch. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a guest in this house. I felt like someone with a seat at the table, whether David liked it or not. It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind that usually passed without incident. I was in the garden, trimming back some roses, when I saw a car pull up to the driveway. A woman in a sharp navy suit stepped out, clipboard in hand, her heels clicking against the walkway. I recognized her immediately from the phone call weeks earlier. Carol, the Realtor. David was in the driveway before she even reached the door, his charm already turned on. "Carol, what a surprise," he said, his tone light but with an edge that only someone listening closely would notice. Carol smiled politely, flipping through her folder. "I just need a few signatures to finalize the paperwork. Is Mrs. Margaret Whitman here? We'll need her signature as well." For a moment, the air froze. David's expression didn't falter, but his eyes shifted almost imperceptibly toward the house, toward me, standing by the garden gate. I stepped forward, wiping my hands on my jeans. "I'm right here," I said, my voice steady. Carol smiled at me warmly. "Perfect. This will just take a few moments. It's for the property at 418 Meadowbrook Lane." David let out a small laugh, too casual. "Yes, about that. Margaret's involvement is really just a technicality. I can handle it for her." Carol frowned slightly. "I'm afraid that's not possible, David. Her signature is required. It's part of the recorded ownership documents. Without it, we can't proceed." I felt a shift inside me, not fear, but a cold, focused clarity. The very thing David had been trying to downplay was now being stated, out loud in front of both of us. David glanced at me, his smile tightening. Of course. We'll arrange a time that works for everyone." Carol nodded, apparently satisfied, and after a few more polite exchanges, she returned to her car and drove away. The moment she was gone, David turned to Anna, who had been watching from the doorway. His hand gently touched her back as he guided her inside. "Let's talk," he said, his voice low. I stayed near the hallway, pretending to organize some mail, my ears attuned to the muffled voices coming from the study. "I told you this would be a problem," David said, his tone tight. Anna's voice was softer, almost hesitant. "It's not like she's trying to make trouble. She probably doesn't even know what's going on." "That's exactly the point," David snapped. "She doesn't need to know. The longer we drag this out, the harder it will be to move forward." There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. "She's going to ask questions," Anna said quietly. "Not if we manage this properly," David replied. "I just need her signature. Then it's done." My pulse quickened. Done? Done with what? I stepped away from the door before they could hear my breath catch. The words I'd overheard swirled in my mind like a storm, phrases that hinted at plans I wasn't supposed to know about. For the rest of the day, I kept my distance. I busied myself with light chores, smiled politely at lunch, and excused myself early in the evening. But inside, a knot of suspicion tightened. David wasn't just trying to erase my name from a piece of paper. He was trying to make a move that would leave me without a foothold in this house entirely. That night, I sat on my bed, staring at the envelope in my drawer. The documents inside felt heavier now, more urgent. Carol's visit had confirmed what I already suspected. This wasn't just about old paperwork. There was a plan in motion, and I was standing directly in its path. I didn't know exactly what David intended, but I knew this. If I wasn't careful, I could lose everything. And for the first time since moving in, I felt the full weight of the risk. The following Monday, I called Carol. I kept my voice calm, steady, even cheerful, as though I were just another homeowner asking about routine paperwork. She agreed to meet me at a small coffee shop in town. When I arrived, she was already seated at a corner table, her clipboard neatly stacked with folders. She greeted me warmly. "Margaret," she said, "I'm so glad you reached out. I had a feeling you might have questions." I sat down, my hands folded neatly in front of me. "I just wanted to understand exactly why my signature is needed," I said. Carol opened her folder, flipping to a copy of the property record. There, in bold black print, was my name listed right alongside David's and Anna's. "You're a recorded co-owner of this property," she explained. "That means any sale, refinance, or title transfer requires your explicit consent. It's standard legal procedure." Her words were a steady drumbeat in my ears. Recorded co-owner. I nodded, my heart quietly steadying. "Out of curiosity," I said carefully, "what happens if I don't sign?" Carol hesitated. "Well, nothing can move forward without you. The property can't be sold or refinanced without your agreement. It essentially freezes the process until all owners sign." I thanked her, asked a few more questions to mask the fact that my mind was already racing ahead. When we parted ways, she shook my hand warmly. "If you need me to explain anything else, just give me a call." Walking back to my car, I felt lighter. Not because the problem was gone, but because for the first time in weeks, I had something tangible. David couldn't move without me. That afternoon, while David was at work and Anna was out running errands, I returned to my room and pulled the manila envelope from the drawer. I laid the documents out on the bed, the original loan agreement, the property records, the failed title transfer request. I took my phone from my purse and began photographing each page, carefully ensuring every detail was captured. Then I dug out an old address book from my suitcase. Near the back, in my late husband's handwriting, was a number I hadn't dialed in years. Mark Evans, the lawyer Richard and I had used for our estate planning. I called him. His voice was older, but still familiar. "Margaret, it's been a long time," he said. "I'm afraid I need some legal advice," I told him, my voice low, "and I'd prefer to keep it between us for now." We agreed to meet the next day. When I arrived at his office, I handed him the copies I'd made. He looked them over, his brow furrowing as he read. "Margaret, you're in a strong position here," he said finally. "Your name on the title gives you legal standing. They can't remove you without your consent, and they can't sell or refinance without you. As long as you don't sign anything, you're safe." Safe. It was a word I hadn't felt in weeks. Mark made additional copies for his files and promised to keep everything secure. "If anything changes, or if they try to pressure you, call me right away," he said. On the drive home, I thought about my next step. Simply knowing I was protected wasn't enough. David was still moving behind closed doors, still treating me like a guest who could be brushed aside. It was time to change that dynamic. That night, as I sat alone in my room, a plan began to form. A family dinner. One where everything would come out in the open. Not in anger, not in chaos, but with the calm precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I imagined the scene. Anna at the table, the children upstairs, David across from me. The documents laid neatly in front of him. The truth no longer whispered in corners, but spoken plainly. I didn't know exactly how David would react. He might bluster, deny, or even attempt to charm his way through. But it wouldn't matter. I wouldn't be walking into that dinner defenseless. For the next few days, I went about my routines as though nothing had changed. I smiled when Anna talked about the kids' school events. I nodded when David made polite conversation about the weather. But inside, I was steady, patient. I was waiting for the right night, the one when everything would be set in motion. And when that night came, I would be ready. The night I'd chosen for the dinner arrived like any other. I didn't want anything to feel unusual, nothing that might tip David off. Anna had made a pot roast, the rich aroma filling the house. The children were upstairs working on a school project, leaving the dining table for just the three of us. I waited until everyone was seated, plates filled, casual conversation flowing. Anna talked about the kids' soccer game next weekend. David added a story from work, his tone easy, his smile practiced. It was almost convincing. When the conversation lulled, I reached for my purse, resting against the chair beside me. My fingers brushed the neat folder I'd placed there earlier. "I've been going through some of my old paperwork," I said lightly, placing the folder on the table. "I came across a few things that I think we should all look at together." David's fork paused mid-air. Anna glanced between us, her expression curious. I opened the folder slowly, sliding out the property documents one by one. The title record was on top, my name printed clearly alongside David's and Anna's. "Do you remember when we bought the house, Anna?" I asked, my voice calm. "You told me adding my name to the title was just to help with the loan." Anna nodded hesitantly. "Yes, I remember. It was the only way to get approved at the time." David's eyes narrowed slightly, though his smile remained in place. "Margaret, I'm sure this is all just old paperwork, nothing that affects anything now." I looked directly at him. "That's not quite true, David." I slid the second document across the table, the failed title transfer request. "You see, any change to the ownership of this house requires my signature, and I haven't signed anything." Anna's eyes widened, scanning the page. "What is this?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. David leaned back in his chair, his expression still controlled. "It was just an administrative update. We thought it would be simpler if the house was only in our names. It doesn't mean anything." "Doesn't mean anything?" I said softly, my tone firm. "It means that no matter what plans you have, David, this house cannot be sold, refinanced, or transferred without my consent." The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Anna turned to David, shock flashing across her face. "Is that true?" David hesitated, the first real crack in his composure appearing. "Technically, yes, but—" "No buts." Anna interrupted, her voice sharp now. "You tried to change the ownership without telling me?" David's calm facade began to crumble. It wasn't like that. I was going to explain. You just didn't want her to know until it was done, I said quietly, cutting him off. The silence that followed was thick, the kind that fills a room when truths can no longer be avoided. Anna looked at me, her expression a mix of disbelief and concern. "Mom, why didn't you tell me about this sooner?" "Because I wanted to be sure," I replied. "I didn't want to accuse anyone without proof, but now everything is clear." David pushed his chair back slightly, as if putting physical distance between himself and the documents on the table. His eyes flickered from the papers to Anna, searching for some foothold, but there was none. For weeks I had been the quiet observer, the guest in his home. But tonight the dynamic shifted. I wasn't just defending myself, I was asserting my rightful place in this house. I folded my hands neatly, my voice steady. From now on, any decisions about this home will include me. I'm not here on borrowed time. This is my home too. Anna looked at me, then at David. For the first time, I saw her shoulders straighten, her gaze sharp. "She's right," she said. "We can't pretend this didn't happen." David didn't respond. His silence was louder than anything he could have said. The rest of the meal passed in quiet tension. I didn't push further. I didn't need to. The truth was out, laid bare on the table alongside the remnants of dinner. For the first time in weeks, I felt a quiet sense of control settle in my chest. The room stayed heavy with silence long after the plates had been cleared. David sat back in his chair, his jaw tight, his hands folded as though holding himself together. Anna, still staring at the documents on the table, finally broke the quiet. "I need you to explain this, David," she said, her voice low but firm. David's eyes flickered toward me, then back to her. "I was trying to simplify things, Anna, to make sure everything was streamlined." "Streamlined," she repeated, her voice sharper now. "By removing my mother from the title of her own house? Without saying a word to me?" David exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging. "I didn't think it would be an issue. It's just complicated to have 3 names on the documents." "It's not complicated," I said quietly but firmly. "It's inconvenient for you. That's different." Anna's gaze snapped back to him. "Did you ever plan to tell me?" He hesitated, and in that pause there was an answer she didn't want to hear. Anna leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. "I can't believe you would do this. And to my mom, of all people." David looked at her, then at me, then back again, as if weighing how much ground he was about to lose. Finally, he lowered his head. "You're right," he said. His voice was subdued now, the polished certainty gone. "I handled this badly. Margaret, I'm sorry." I studied his face, looking for signs of sincerity. It wasn't that I wanted an apology. It was that I wanted recognition of the truth. "I appreciate your apology," I said after a moment. "But this isn't just about words. This is about how we live in this house from now on." Anna glanced at me, surprised. I could see she half expected me to demand David leave or to threaten legal action. But that wasn't what I wanted. I wasn't here to blow the family apart. I was here to make sure my place was respected. "This house belongs to all 3 of us," I continued. "That means decisions are made by all 3 of us. I'm not here to fight, but I'm also not here to be treated like a guest who can be asked to leave at any moment." David nodded slowly, the reality settling in. "From now on," I added, my tone measured, "any decisions about finances, renovations, or potential sales are discussed openly, with all parties present. And if there's a problem, we address it directly, not behind closed doors." Anna straightened in her chair, her eyes moving from me to David. "I agree," she said firmly. "Mom has every right to be involved. This stops now." David didn't argue. For once, he didn't have a polished response or a clever deflection. He simply nodded. In that moment, the balance shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors. But the quiet acknowledgement of my place in the household was enough. I decided not to push him out. That wasn't the point. Throwing him out would have created more chaos, and I wasn't here to destroy Anna's family life. I was here to protect my own stability and, by extension, hers. Instead, I offered the terms clearly, in a way that left no doubt. We're going to move forward as a family, but this arrangement will work only if there's respect. I won't be sidelined again. David's voice was low, almost cautious. Understood. The rest of the evening was subdued. The kids came downstairs after dinner, chattering about their school project, and we all managed to carry on as though nothing monumental had just shifted. On the surface, the appearance of harmony was maintained. But beneath that surface, the power dynamic had changed completely. In the days that followed, I noticed the subtle differences. David no longer dismissed my presence in the kitchen. He didn't interfere when I rearranged a shelf or made dinner. Anna began consulting me about household decisions, not just out of courtesy, but because my role in the home was now firmly established. The house felt different, not entirely free of tension, but balanced in a way it hadn't been before. I knew David wasn't suddenly a changed man. He still preferred control, still liked order. But now he understood that this wasn't just his home, and whether he liked it or not, I wasn't going anywhere. The shift didn't happen overnight, but in the months that followed, the atmosphere in the house began to change. The invisible boundaries that had once hemmed me in slowly loosened. It started with small things. Anna asking for my opinion on a kitchen renovation she'd been considering, David offering a genuine thank you when I prepared Sunday breakfast. I still had my room at the back of the house, but now it felt less like a tucked-away guest space and more like a sanctuary. Anna had helped me rearrange the furniture, adding a small armchair by the window where I could read or knit. We even cleared out the unused storage room next to mine so I could use it as a small personal sitting area. For the first time since moving in, I had a corner of the house that was entirely my own, not just physically, but in spirit. David's behavior shifted in subtler ways. He no longer made comments about his kitchen or straightened the throw pillows after I left the room. When I was cooking, he occasionally asked if I needed help. Sometimes he even stayed to chat while I chopped vegetables. It was tempting to believe he'd turned over a new leaf, but I reminded myself that change in people like David was rarely that simple. His politeness was deliberate, his cooperation careful. Still, I noticed the effort. An effort, I told myself, was worth acknowledging. One Saturday afternoon, the three of us sat on the patio, watching the kids play in the yard. Anna sipped iced tea while David manned the grill. "I've been thinking," David said suddenly, glancing at me, "about the backyard fence. It's due for repair. I thought we could all go over the plans together, decide what works best." It was a small moment, but significant. Months ago, he would have made the decision himself, perhaps informing me after the fact. Now he was including me, openly and without hesitation. Anna smiled at him, clearly pleased. "That sounds like a good idea. We should all have a say." I nodded, keeping my expression calm. I'd like that. Inside, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of caution. It was good that David was making an effort, but I had learned enough to know that harmony in this household required vigilance. Trust was something earned slowly, and I wasn't ready to let my guard down completely. Still, the family dynamic had shifted. There was more open communication, more respect. Anna had found her voice as well, no longer sidestepping difficult conversations. I noticed her pushing back, gently but firmly, when David's old habits resurfaced. The children seemed happier too, sensing the reduced tension. They came to my room often, bringing books for me to read or asking me to bake cookies with them. I no longer felt like an interloper in their lives. I began hosting small Sunday dinners, a tradition that started quietly but soon became a fixture. The table would be filled with roast chicken, vegetables, fresh bread. David would pour wine, Anna would set out dessert, and the air would hum with conversation. On the surface, it was everything I had hoped for when I first moved in, a family sharing meals, laughter, and stability. And yet, in the quiet moments after everyone had gone to bed, I would sit in my armchair, the house silent, and remind myself, stability doesn't mean complacency. David was careful now, thoughtful even. But I had seen the way he operated when he thought he had the upper hand. I wasn't naive enough to think he had completely abandoned that instinct, so I stayed prepared. My documents were still safely stored, copies kept with my lawyer. I never flaunted my position, but I didn't let myself forget it either. Anna sometimes teased me about how organized I'd become, keeping my own records neatly filed. "You're more meticulous than David now," she laughed one evening. "Old habits," I said with a smile. But inside, I knew it wasn't habit, it was strategy. The house had become more peaceful, yes, but peace, I'd learned, was something you protected. And so, as the months went on, I allowed myself to enjoy the calm, the family dinners, the respectful conversations. But I also kept one eye open, ready for the next shift in the tide, just in case. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when everyone has finally settled into a rhythm. Anna was upstairs reading to the children. David was finishing up paperwork in his office, and I was in my small sitting room, sipping tea by the window. It had been several months since that dinner where everything changed. The tension that once lived in every corner of the house had softened. We moved around each other now with a kind of practiced respect. It wasn't perfect, but it was stable. I'd had time to think about how we got here, how I'd gone from shrinking in the shadows to sitting at the table as an equal. And the truth was, it wasn't because I shouted the loudest or fought the hardest. It was because I waited. I observed. I chose my moment. Richard used to say, "A well-timed move is more powerful than 100 hasty ones." I never understood the full weight of those words until now. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. I thought about the early weeks here, the way I had felt small, unwelcome, almost invisible. I thought about the sting of David's words, "This isn't your kitchen." And I thought about the moment when the tide turned, when the papers came out and the truth could no longer be hidden. If I'd confronted him too early, I might have been dismissed. If I'd pushed too hard without proof, I might have looked unreasonable. But by waiting, by letting the truth build quietly in the background, I had given my words the weight they needed when the time came. It was a strange kind of lesson, one I wouldn't have chosen, but one I understood deeply now. And maybe that was the real takeaway. Never underestimate the strength of someone who has lived a whole life of sacrifice and survival. We know how to endure, and we know how to act when the time is right. These days, I enjoy my place in the household, but I also enjoy the independence I've carved for myself. I have my own routines, my own corner of the world. The house feels like home, not because anyone gave me permission, but because I claimed it. One crisp autumn morning, I was arranging flowers on the kitchen table when the phone rang. I answered, expecting Anna or maybe the school. "Margaret Whitman?" a familiar voice asked. "Yes. This is she." "This is Carol from Westwood Realty. I wanted to follow up with you about an opportunity that might interest you." I smiled, my fingers tightening slightly around the phone. "Go on," I said. "There's a property coming onto the market soon, a small duplex. Given your name is on the current house and your financial position, I thought you might be interested in exploring a personal investment." My smile deepened. I'd like to hear more. We arranged to meet later that week. When I hung up the phone, I stood for a moment, looking out the kitchen window at the yard where the children were playing. Life has a way of circling back on itself, of offering chances you never expected. I didn't know if I would buy the property. I didn't know if I wanted another investment or if I simply wanted to know I had the option. But that was the point. I had the option. That freedom, that control, was something I had quietly secured for myself. That evening, over dinner, Anna chatted about her day. David commented on the news, and I listened, smiling quietly. The dynamic had shifted for good. David didn't know about Carol's call yet. Maybe I'd tell him, maybe I wouldn't. But either way, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, I would be ready. Sometimes, the most powerful position in the room belongs to the person who doesn't need to raise their voice. And as I sat there, listening to the hum of conversation around the table, I realized something else. I wasn't just surviving in this house anymore. I was living.